The street was empty except for the occasional flicker of a failing street lamp. It was late, past midnight, and the only sound that accompanied him was the rhythmic tapping of his own footsteps against the pavement. The city was different at night, stripped of its usual life, leaving behind only shadows stretching unnaturally long under the cold glow of artificial light. The silence felt unnatural, pressing against his ears, making even the smallest sound seem amplified. Then he heard it. Footsteps. At first, he ignored it, convincing himself that the noise was just an echo of his own. But as he continued walking, he noticed something odd. When he stopped, the footsteps continued for a second longer. A single extra step. It was small, barely noticeable, but enough to send a shiver crawling up his spine. Slowly, he turned his head and glanced over his shoulder. A woman stood beneath the nearest street lamp. She wasn't moving, just standing there, her posture stiff, her head slightly tilted. Something about the way she held herself seemed off, like she wasn't entirely sure how to stand naturally. Her long coat hung loosely around her, swaying slightly in the breeze, but what caught his attention the most, what made his stomach twist into an unnatural knot, was her face. Or rather, the absence of one. There was nothing there. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just smooth, pale skin stretching from her forehead to her chin, featureless like a mannequin. His breath hitched. His heart pounded against his ribs, an instinctual fear rising inside him. His mind fought to rationalize what he was seeing. Maybe it was a mask. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Then he blinked. And suddenly, she had a face. He staggered back. The transformation was seamless, instant, and horrifying. The features on her face didn't seem to fit together properly. Her eyes were too wide, her mouth stretched too long, her skin too smooth in some places and wrinkled in others. It was as if someone had forced different parts of different people onto her head, creating an imitation of a human face that didn't quite work. And worse, she was closer now. His breath came in short, uneven gasps. He hadn't seen her move. 1 second, she was standing beneath the street lamp, and the next, she was several feet closer. His instincts screamed at him to run, to turn around and bolt for his apartment, but his body was frozen in place. He was locked in a battle between logic and terror, trying to process what he had just witnessed. He blinked again. She was even closer. A strangled noise escaped his throat as he turned and ran, feet pounding against the pavement. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could feel it, something behind him, something watching, something getting closer with every fleeting moment his eyelids dared to close. His apartment building loomed ahead, a beacon of salvation in the dark. He reached the door, fumbling with his keys, fingers shaking so violently that he could barely fit them into the lock. A cold sensation crept up his spine, a whisper of breath too close to his ear. He shoved the key in, twisted it, and nearly fell inside as he slammed the door shut behind him. His hands pressed against the wood, body trembling as he tried to catch his breath. The silence in his apartment felt suffocating. He slowly turned and peered through the peephole. Nothing. The hallway was empty. No strange woman. No shifting shadows. No sign that anything had ever been there at all. His phone buzzed. His stomach twisted as he hesitantly pulled it out of his pocket. His screen illuminated the dark room, displaying a single message from an unknown number. "Why did you blink?" His throat went dry. His fingers felt ice cold as he gripped the device, his mind racing. The message shouldn't have been possible. No one else had been there. No one else should have known. A soft sound filled the room. A breath. His eyes darted around, scanning every corner, every shadow, every possible hiding place. His apartment was small, barely enough room for a couch and a bed. There was nowhere for someone to hide. And yet, the air felt thick with presence, like someone was standing right behind him. His gaze landed on the mirror across the room. And there she was. Not in the room. In the reflection. Standing just behind him, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. He spun around. Nothing. His breath was ragged as he turned back to the mirror. She hadn't moved. She was still there. Still staring at him. But the worst part, the part that made his blood freeze in his veins, was her face. It was different. Again. It was shifting. Warping. Like something struggling to settle on the right features, as if it couldn't decide what face to wear. Every time his eyes flickered, even slightly, it changed. Different eyes. Different mouths. It was cycling through expressions, through identities, as if it was trying to find one that fit. Then he saw it. For a fraction of a second, a single blink of an instant. It had his face. He backed away, his breath shallow. He squeezed his eyes shut, willing the vision away, willing himself to wake up from whatever nightmare he had stumbled into. But when he opened them, she was standing in front of him. Not in the mirror. In his apartment. The light above flickered and died. The room plunged into darkness. The only thing he could hear was his own breathing. And then, just inches from his ear, a whisper. Stop blinking. His body locked up, every muscle frozen in sheer, paralyzing terror. He tried to keep his eyes open, but they burned, dry and aching. The urge to blink became unbearable, the strain too much. His vision blurred. His lids trembled. He blinked. And everything changed. When he opened his eyes, it was morning. Sunlight streamed through his window, casting a golden glow over the room. His heart was still hammering in his chest, but everything looked normal. No woman. No shifting faces. Just the quiet hum of the city outside. Had it been a dream? A sleep paralysis hallucination? His thoughts reeled as he swung his legs over the bed, rubbing his tired eyes. Maybe he had imagined it all. Maybe he was just exhausted. He let out a shaky breath and stood up, making his way to the bathroom. The mirror awaited him. His own reflection stared back, tired, worn. But something about it felt strange. Then it blinked. Before he did, he took a step back, his breath catching in his throat. His own face smiled. He hadn't moved. And then he understood. She had found the right face.